This is a video in the Logic Industry Learning Series on 8 simple things you can do with Wonderware Historian to get actionable information right now. We'll talk a little bit about Historian itself and some configuration options that you'll find helpful. And we'll also take quite a bit of a look at Historian Client. This video does assume that the viewer is already familiar with Historian and Historian Client in general. We're not going to get very deep into Historian Client or Historian's configuration, but we will highlight some different areas in there. So if you are new to Historian Client, you might want to brush up on some of the basics, fire up trend, make a simple workbook, and so on before you watch this video. The agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about the data that we have being simulated in the background to act as our data source, just so we understand what we're going to be looking at. And then we'll dive into those 8 simple things. This video was inspired by a guide that Wonderware recently released called the Wonderware Historian Server Scenarios Guide that goes over 8 different kinds of queries that people might find very helpful, but aren't so obvious. And so they wrote a whole guide around how you could use those things. And we took that guide and added some of our own things to it and borrowed from that as well and came up with our own list of 8 simple things. First of all, let's talk a little bit about the data simulation we have running. We have a Wonderware application server project running that's simulating bottle filling. We actually have 4 bottler machines running inside application server, and we have an InTouch application on top of it so that we can see what's going on. And it just has a variety of different kinds of data types. We have temperatures and volumes and the machine state, so we're keeping track of when the machine is running and when it's down. We're keeping track of how long it takes for it to run through its cycles. We have it counting how many bottles it's making and also how much power it consumes. So we have a variety of data here that we're going to use for various querying scenarios. And just to show you, we have that running here. Here's the InTouch application. We can see that it's actively going through and filling these bottles. This is the most inefficient bottling machine you've ever seen. It takes several seconds for it to fill a bottle, and it's only filling 1 bottle at a time, but it will do for today's demonstration. All right, now on to the 8 things. First of all, Wonderware has recently released a new product called Historian Insight. They sneakily introduced it as part of Patch 1 for Historian 2014 R2 Service Pack 1. So they didn't make a big fanfare about it, but if you have that patch, when you install it, you might notice that during the installation, you have an option to install Historian Insight. Historian Insight is a website that is fully HTML5 compliant. So it runs very well inside Internet Explorer or Microsoft Edge or Chrome or Firefox or Safari or any of those modern browsers. And what's nice is it does not require Microsoft's Internet Information Services. It does not require the Microsoft standard web server. Historian Insight comes with its own web stack, and so you don't have much to configure. You just install and it's ready to go. And then what you get is a very nice web-based client for you to go in and look at any and all of your Historian tags that are running on that Historian. If I bring it up here on my computer, I'll just go to Internet Explorer and I'm on the Historian. So right here you can see the default address and it loads up with some content that we've worked on. And it's a very nice search functionality. So for example, if I want to look for all the temperature tags, all I have to do is type in the word temperature and it's going to automatically find anything that I've created that has anything to do with temperature, including any content like existing charts I might have made or dashboards, along with any of the tags. And we can drill in and then get more information about those things, or I can just click on a category and it just brought in every tag that had to do with temperature. I only have a handful here. And by default, it's showing us a kind of a summary chart here and a bar chart showing us the average value, but it defaulted to the last 24 hours. Well, today. It defaulted to today. But we have some shortcuts here. We can skip around to various times. We can pick different calculations. Of course, my simulation's pretty standard, so a lot of those numbers are going to be the same. They're using the same kind of just random algorithms. And we can quickly change to different kinds of displays. So here's a nice status board that shows current values and whether the value's trending up or down, along with a little spark line over on the side. Of course, you can do trends, kind of like what you're expecting normally on these kinds of things. A nice little trend or a line chart. And as you move the mouse along the values, it has this nice pop-up showing you the timestamp and what all those tag values were at that time. And you can get the bar charts and various grids. I'm not going to go into every little detail on this. I just want to, the point here is to make sure that you're aware that this exists. But this is very, very cool. Very quickly build whatever kind of content you want. We can control what we're displaying on the screen on the fly. Maybe I only want to see 2 of these tags, or I want to see all 4. Historian Insight allows you, once you've created some content that you'd like, you can share it with other people, embed it into other web pages if you'd like to. You can download the data, and you can also save the content for later. You can give this content a name, tag it with some keywords, and make it really easy to find. If I go back to the home page, we'll see that I've already done this a couple of times. That was the content we saw show up here on the home page. So under suggested content, I had already created some content called bottler temperatures, another one called machine state. So you can just click on those and just go right to whatever it is you wanted to look at. So this machine state one is showing the value of an integer tag that we use as kind of an enumeration of whether the machine is running or not. When the machine is running, it's got a value of 1, and then values of 2, 3, and 4 mean other things, like maybe it's down because it's clogged or something like that. So you can save your content, look at it later, change it, save it again if you want to update the definition. And you can also create dashboards. So here we have a bottler dashboard where we've combined those 2 displays, the bottler temperatures and the machine state together. And then we could add more to this. You could have a nice dashboard that has multiple pieces of content. But here we go. So this is Historian Insight. It runs in your plant, on your Historian, looking at data on that Historian. It does not require Microsoft's web server. It has its own web stack that it runs on. And it just works. It hooks up to your Historian, starts making the tags available for you to search on, and you just start building content. The security for it is controlled through Windows user groups using the same Windows groups that Historian itself uses for security. So it's very easy to get security configured. So you can define administrators who are allowed to manipulate the Insight website versus just users who can go in and look at content and so on. So very, very nice. And it comes with, again, Historian 2014 R2 Service Pack 1 Patch 1. It's an option during the patch install. So that is Historian Insight. A very simple thing to get installed and running. Part of Historian 2014 R2 SP1 Patch 1. And just very nice tool, very easy to get going, and provides a lot of valuable functionality. All right, moving on to the second thing. The second simple thing we can work with when trying to get Historian data is some Historian-aware Kester Graphics. If you are using Application Server and Kester Graphics, there are a couple of different kinds of things you can do inside your graphics to easily get Historian data right there into your InTouch applications to help you provide context to your data. The first thing is the trend pen graphic. which is used to create things like, for example, this spark line example we have right here. And we also can do custom properties on our Kester Graphics that are historian aware. They are the history summary style custom properties. Very easy to set up, and what those let you do is get aggregated data from your historian. Back in our InTouch application, we have this here. We have a couple of trend pens over here on the left. One of them's flatlined because the bottler hasn't been doing anything in a while. Let's see if we can find a bottler that's actively making something right now. Looks like they all went down at the same time. Figures. That's what you get for having a demo running at random intervals. But we have a little bit of example here. So we can see the trend pen showing the temperature. Another one down here showing power demand. Let's just get this running again. All right. They're starting to pick up. And it's actually pulling that history from Historian. Pretty easy to configure. And then here, these three numbers are the custom properties, the history summary custom properties that are showing the maximum, the average, and the minimum temperature over like the last several minutes. Again, just it queries it right out of Historian and updates every so often on the screen. And there is very little that has to be configured for this to get it to work. So it's very slick. You can incorporate Historian data right into your InTouch applications. And let's take a look at how simple that is to configure. First, let's look at the trend pen. Again, a great way of providing historical context to your screens. Nice for spark lines and such, very simple displays, but it can also be used to create more traditional displays that have more information as far as displaying the scale on the axis and having lines in the background, making a little grid and so on. So you can configure it as you'd prefer, making it as simple or as rich as you'd like. As far as hooking it up to a tag, it's very, very simple. In Application Server, you would configure the attribute to be historized. That's just a checkbox inside of Application Server's config on that object. Historize that attribute, and then just reference that attribute in the trend pen properties. So over here, we have it referencing the attribute called bottle.flowrate on whatever that current object is. So we're using some relative references here. It's looking at the object's bottle.flowrate attribute, which we've configured to be historized. And we've also configured it to show 2 minutes worth of history on the screen. And it just automatically wires itself up. It interrogates the galaxy's configuration. It figures out which historian is being used and automatically queries that data for you and displays it on the screen. There's nothing else to do. You don't have to worry about any kind of database connection properties or anything like that. It just figures it out. Very simple to configure. If we go on to look at the custom properties for history summary, you have a wide variety of options on what kind of aggregated data, what kind of historical summary data you want to display on the screen. Here's a list of the different kinds of data you can have it bring back. And all you have to do to configure that, again, is just put in the reference to that attribute here and make sure that when you're defining that custom property on your graphic, you pick the data type as history summary. So instead of defining that custom property as a Boolean or an integer or what have you, it's a history summary data type, which is kind of weird, but that's how you do it. Reference the attribute and then tell it which historical statistic you want to reference. So from this list back here, you just pick one of these from that list and then tell the duration, and it'll go off. And again, just like the trend pen, it'll automatically figure out which historian's being used and make the appropriate query. So in this case, what it's going to pull back is a 5-minute average of the temperature and then have that available to us in a custom property. So here's an example of configuring one that's an analog, looking at a temperature one. Here's an example of looking at a Boolean where we want to do a time and state type of calculation. So it's looking at the last 30 minutes at the percentage amount of time that the cycle is running attribute has a value of 1. So in other words, what's the percent of time in the last 30 minutes that the cycle is running? So you can do those kinds of things as well, the time and state kinds of statistics. And then once you have that, it's just a custom property that you can reference in your graphics. You can simply display them on the screen, and they'll update automatically every so often. Or since they're custom properties, you can even do things like use them in scripts, use them in calculations, do whatever you want to with them. But very, very simple and easy to get configured. So that is the history summary custom property, the second simple thing. The third simple thing for historian data, we don't really have a demo for. It's more of a background thing, but that is setting the WW quality rule to optimistic. You probably have run queries against Historian where sometimes the query results contain null values. That might be because the data sources was offline, or maybe because Historian got rebooted and you're not using application server, so there's no store and forward going on, whatever. But sometimes you get null values in your data. Sometimes you want to know that those data points are null, and sometimes when you have a null in your results, that can be problematic. Well, one way to help handle the case where you do not want nulls to show up in your results, if you can help it, is to set the quality rule equal to optimistic. And what that does is that helps you with gaps in your data by repeating the last known good value. So here's an example. We have down here at the timestamp TC2, there was a gap in here where there was no data being collected. Maybe that PLC was offline or something. And so the person's running a query where it's going to pull samples at these various time periods, these time slices right here. When you have a quality rule of optimistic, when it gets to this timestamp right here and it says what was the value at that time, it's going to say the value was whatever this value was right here, because that was the last known good value. Normally, if you ask for data at this time, you just get a null back. It is a no. But with quality rule equal optimistic, it will find the last known good value in the previous time period and just use that. So if you have a requirement that you want to do, especially statistical calculations and so on, and if nulls mess up your numbers, then use quality rule equal optimistic. That's if you're doing queries by hand, that is something you can just add to your where clause, but the Historian client also has a place where you can configure that when you're configuring your queries inside of Historian client. I will show you where that is in some of the upcoming demos. So that's an option for you. Sometimes you want to know that there are nulls in your results, in which case you wouldn't use this rule, but for when it's appropriate, that is available for you. Now, sometimes Historian just doesn't know. It will try to find the last known good value, but if it can't find one, then it will return a null. The quality rule optimistic is not absolutely positively never going to return a null back to you. That's not how it works. It will try to find the last known good value. If it can't find a last known good value, then you will get a null. So for example, here at timestamp TC1, that gap of null values is quite extensive. And so when you're asked, when it's asked for the data here at timestamp TC1, it will return a null because the previous time period didn't have any data either. However, again, at timestamp TC2, it will return point P2 because it was able to find a value. So anyway, that's how it works, and it can be quite useful in certain scenarios. All right, moving on to simple thing number 4, the summary history views. So Historian has some views defined to help you look at summarized data. These views, the summary history view, is pretty awesome. It just works. And it has data already calculated for you for your tags. There are two of these views, and they already have statistical data ready for you, just ready to go. And they are supported by Historian Client Query, and I will show you what that looks like in Query here in a second. Another great thing about these two views is that they are just ready to go. You do not have to do any kind of summary-based replication. If you're familiar with that feature, this does not require that. It just works for all of your tags. The first view we'll take a look at is for analog tags. It's called Analog Summary History. And in Historian Client Query, that shows up as the query type Analog Statistics. So if I bring up Query, and we go down to Analog Statistics, what this does in the background is it's going to generate a query against the Analog Summary History view. And just by switching to that query type, and I already had an analog tag picked, it already brought back some data here. So we can see down below, it's looking at Bottler 1's bottle count attribute. And here we already have some statistical information that came back. So here's the minimum, the maximum, the average, standard deviation. Those are just the default values it brings back here. But we can look at other things too. We can look at the percentage good, the first value in the time period, last value in the time period, how many values is pulled back, and so on. So all that statistical data is just ready for you to go. If we switch to the SQL view, you can see here that Query has generated a query against the Analog Summary History view inside of Historian for that attribute, for that tag. And it's just doing a cyclic retrieval and pulling back one record here. But we can, just like any query you can run inside here, inside Query, we can manipulate the time frame, and we can change the rules and pull back more records and so on. And so there's a lot of flexibility here. But just nice and simple and quick, boom, we got some statistical data. Min, max, average, standard deviation, integral, all that stuff just comes right on back. There's a similar view for discrete data, and it's called State Summary History. And really, I should correct myself. It's not just discrete data. Yes, it works for your Booleans. It's a nice, simple, quick view to use to get things like time and state for true and false. So it'd be great for things like you want to get time and state on whether or not a pump is running, time and state for whether a valve is open or closed. But it also works very well with state-based integer tags. So if you have an integer tag that represents maybe a machine state, it works great for that as well. For example, in our InTouch application, I told you earlier, this machine randomly goes up and down at various intervals, and it's down again. We are tracking that using an integer tag called machine state, or I should say an integer attribute called machine state. When the value is 1, that means the machine is running. If the value is 2, then it's down and it's misaligned. If the value is 3, it means it's down because it's clogged. If the value is 4, it's a power issue. And if it's 5, that means it's starved. So that's kind of how we're using an integer tag as a state. And the state summary history view works with those very well also. You can get the time and state for each of those values. So that integer tag uses 5 different values to represent the machine state, and we can get time and state on all 5 of those states. Let's go back to Query. We can take a look at it there. So that shows up in Query as state statistics in the query type. So if I go to state statistics, and let's pick a discrete tag like machine state. Let's pick is running first. I'll do a discrete tag first. Is running. So it's true if it's running and false if it's not. We have some quick statistics here on time and state, the average time and state, and so on. Plus you can see some other things we could pick here as well that I just haven't been turned on in our results. And if we go to the SQL tab, you can see that it's simply running a query against the state summary history view for that attribute. Let's take a look at that machine state tag I was talking about. If we go here to machine state and then look at the data, well, we're looking at, let's see here, the last 5 minutes. In the last 5 minutes, it's only been in two different states. The value 1, which meant that it was running, and the value 5, which again, 5 meant starved. We're now running again. So let's extend the time frame a little bit and see if we can get some more states here. Here we go. Now we have quite a bit. So now I'm looking at the last 4 hours for the machine state, and we have then all 5 of the states represented here. And then over here we can see how many times it's entered each state, how many minutes, or I'm sorry, the minimum amount of time it's spent in that state, the maximum amount of time it's spent, and so on, the average and the percentages. So that, again, very simple, very quick. It just does all these statistics for you. You don't have to do any finagling of the queries. It just works. So that is built right into Historian, and it's supported by Historian Client Query. Of course, you can always get to this data using custom SQL if you need to do that for some reporting tool like SQL Server reporting services or so on. Or here it is in the query tool. Unfortunately, the workbook plugin for Excel does not have support for this kind of query type, but query does. All right. So that's the fourth simple thing, the summary history views. The fifth simple thing is value state retrieval. So there's some overlap here with state summary history, but sometimes you don't want to query that, or maybe you want to query your value states from the workbook plugin, which does not support state summary history, but you do want to look at something very similar to what we just looked at. We just looked at in query time and state information about the different machine states. Well, we have another way to do this. We can query the history table itself, not the state summary history view, but the history table itself, but then specify a query type of value state, or we should say a retrieval mode. It works well with integers and discretes, or even string tags that are used to represent different statuses. And we can use this in Workbook. So let's open up Workbook here. I have a query that looks at the machine state back in November here, and we can see the different states represented here, along with how long it's spent in each of those states. Let me move the cursor down so you can see the formula in the formula bar, and then I'm going to go to the Historian tab, and I'm going to click on Edit Function so that we can see how this is put together. Again, I'm assuming you already have some knowledge about the Workbook plugin. I'm not going to go into all the details about it, but I do want to show you where we set up the value state query. So, of course, you have to tell it which historian you're going to hit, and it wants to know which tags you're going to reference, where you want the output to go. And then here's where the magic happens. On the Retrieval tab, this is probably very commonly skipped over. We just kind of go with the defaults here, but you can go to the Retrieval tab on the main options sub-tab, and there's Retrieval mode. And we have a ton of options for Retrieval mode, and probably the most common ones are cyclic or delta. But here we have value state. So we're telling Historian to run this query to do a retrieval mode of value state. We just want to get a small number of records back. And we want to do a state calculation of average contained. So in other words, it's going to give us back the average amount of time it spent in each state that inside the time period that whatever time period we have it configured to query. So let's look back at our query here. Looks like we're doing daily. So it's giving us the average amount of time in that 24-hour period that it's spent in each state. And that's how you set that here on this other sub-tab. That would be the state calculation. One interesting thing to note here as well, way back, I think on step 3, I mentioned the quality rule of optimistic. This is where you can set that here in Historian Client Workbook on this Retrieval tab, the other sub-tab, values to include in calculations, we can pick optimistic quality rule right here. So that's really all you have to do to use value state. You set the retrieval mode to value state. You tell it on this other tab, you tell it which state calculation you want. And of course, the last step is the time period you're looking at, and you get your data. And that's going to look at all the states. Of course, if we were looking at a discrete tag right now, we'd only get back 2 states per time period. We get back true or false, 0 or 1. But with integers and strings, you get back however many values, distinct values were recorded. So this is not an appropriate query to use against just any old integer tag. It's not really appropriate for that. But if the integer tag or string tag is used for specific states and there aren't just a gazillion distinct values for that, it's pretty good for that. I'm going to show you another tweak. Maybe you're not interested in looking at every single state. Maybe you only want to look at the state of when the machine was running. Let's edit that function again. And let's change it so that all we're going to see is when the machine is running. In other words, when the machine state is equal to 1. Go back to the retrieval tab, and then on the other subtab, specify the state and say we only want to get when the data is 1. Click next, click finish, and now we're only looking at when the machine was running, and it ignores everything else. So you can be specific, filter to specific states, or you can just have it bring back all of them. But that's the value state query type. Works pretty well, and it works inside Workbook. So that's simple thing number 5. Simple thing number 6 is counter retrieval. And hey, it's exactly what it sounds like. It counts. So let's say we have a counter going. So for example, back in our simulation here, it is counting the number of bottles it's created. Right over here we have bottle count, 95. It's made 95 bottles. What if we want to run a query that tells us how many bottles we've made in a day or in a shift or in a month? That is where you would use counter-based retrieval. What's great about it is it supports both an automatic rollover counter, or you can just have it roll over manually. So for example, in our demo, this counter, I've configured it to roll over pretty often. It rolls over at 100 so that we can see it in the demos. We can see that it rolls over a lot. Historian handles that automatically. You can just go in and say, hey, my rollover value is 100. You'll never see a counter value bigger than that. And that's what it expects. So basically what that means is when the counter value, let's say the last counter value it saw was 95, and then all of a sudden the counter value has a value of 2, that means that Historian will see that, and it will assume that it counted all the way up to 100 and then to 2. So it'll count what? Like I said, would be 7 bottles there in that scenario. So it handles that automatic rollover, or it also handles manual rollover, where the way that works is when it's counting, as long as that counter value is increasing, it just keeps counting along with that, doing the math. However, whenever that value then all of a sudden becomes less, like for example, if the counter value originally it saw was 95, and then all of a sudden the counter value is 2. With manual reset, it does not assume that it got to 100 and then to 2, and then so it ends up counting 7. That's how it works with automatic rollover. With manual rollover, you would see that the last counter value was 95. All of a sudden it's 2. It just assumes that the last value, the high value it had was 95, and it got reset right then. The next value it saw was 2, so it just counts 2. It assumes that you reset it back to 0, and then it counted 2 more from there. So that's the difference between manual and automatic rollover, but it supports both. The Historian client handles that. The query tool handles it. Workbook handles it for reports. Let's show you an example. If we go here to counter production, this tab in Excel, we have a little report here showing the number of bottles created per shift. So we're assuming an 8-hour shift starting at 7 a.m. And we've broken up our results looking back in November, starting at 7 a.m., and we have the bottle count for bottler number 1 per shift. And I said earlier, the counter resets at 100. Historian's smart enough to handle that. It's not that's not a problem. It just keeps counting right along and keeps adding, and whenever that counter rolls over at 100, it just counts away. It handles the rollover just fine. So you don't have to worry about it undercounting. How is this configured? Very similar to how we did the value state retrieval. We'll skip through the first few steps. When I edit the function, we go to the retrieval tab, and it's just another retrieval mode here in this list, counter. And that's about it. The other thing, we told it to get records every 8 hours for the shifts. There's really nothing to configure on this second tab. You know, we stuck with optimistic quality, but there's no like with state retrieval, you had to tell it which state calculation you wanted and so on. Here, we don't have to do anything extra like that. All you have to do is just say, hey, use the counter retrieval mode, and that's it. And boom, here's our data. There is something to configure, though. This is all very dependent upon whether or not you're using manual or automatic rollover. And of course, if you're using automatic rollover, it needs to know what that maximum rollover value is. If you're using application server, when you configure the attribute to be historized, the rollover value is just another property of the history configuration inside of application server in the IDE. So you just got to make sure that you set the rollover value correctly when you're configuring your object. If you're not using application server, if you're using InTouch or just talking directly to a PLC item or whatever, then you would go to the historian configuration in the system management console and configure the rollover there. Here's a screenshot of what it looks like if you're manually creating a new tag. The rollover value is just a box on that dialog box. Or if you're editing a tag, here's the rollover value. This is where you'd find it there. Or if you're doing CSV file imports for your configuration, you can configure it inside the CSV file as well. So that's very important. If you don't have the rollover value configured correctly, of course, it won't count correctly. Every time it sees the value get reset, it'll think that it went all the way up to whatever your incorrect rollover value was before you reset it, before it got reset back to 0 again, and so your counts will be wrong. If you want to use manual counting, set the rollover value to 0, and that's how you do that. So otherwise, whenever it sees a non-zero rollover value, it'll assume every time it sees that the value is less, that the rollover value had got reset, it'll assume that counted all the way up to the rollover value first before it got reset. So that is counter retrieval. Moving on to simple thing number 7, we have integral retrieval. Integral retrieval is, well, it's like it sounds. It's a little bit of calculus. It calculates the area under a curve, just like we used to do back in calculus class. That is really a great thing whenever you want to convert some kind of a flow or a speed or anything that's measured in a rate, and you want to convert it into a total produced over a time period. So for example, if you have something measured in feet per minute, or if you have a flow measured in gallons per hour, you can, with integral retrieval, convert that into total amount of feet produced or total amount of gallons produced or whatever. Whenever you have any kind of a rate, a unit per unit of time, integral retrieval can convert it into a total. Let me show you an example of that. We'll go over here to integral total flow. We have in our simulation, one of the things we're doing is we're measuring the flow rate of the liquid as it's flowing into the bottle. Again, my demo betrays me. It shuts off when I want to show you something. All of them are not running right now. Wow. Let's go to bottler 1, turn it on again. Here we go. So it's, again, the worst bottler machine ever. It has a really hard time maintaining consistent flow of the liquid into the bottle. It's flying all over the place, but that's where we're measuring that, and it's being historized to Historian. And we want to do a report showing what the total amount of liquid was. Looks like per hour. how we'd put that together? Well, let's look at edit function again. Skip on over to that retrieval tab on step 3 here, and here we go. Integral retrieval mode. Not much to it. Here's one thing. If you want to get consistent results, pick stair-step interpolation. When we looked at the analog statistics earlier in query, let's go back to that real fast. One of the values that it includes in its results is integral. One thing that we found in testing this is that if you want the integral value that you query using integral retrieval mode here to match the same number that you would get if you're looking at analog statistics, if you're using the analog summary history view to look at your data, and you want that number to match, the integral number to match, we found that it must be using, we found that the analog summary history view behind the scenes must be using stair-step interpolation. Because if you pick something else, if you pick linear interpolation here and then try to compare that to numbers you're getting from the analog summary history view, they won't match. But if you pick stair-step interpolation, they will. So I don't want you to get confused by that. You have an option here. You can use the retrieval mode, integral retrieval mode, or you can just query the analog summary history view to get similar data for those numbers to match. If you're looking at the same time period and you have the same sampling rate and all that kind of stuff, if you expect to see the same numbers there, and I would assume you do, use stair-step interpolation. We're still using optimistic quality. Otherwise, there's really nothing else to configure on this tab. And of course, we have our time frame, and here's our totals, total amounts that flowed through there. So that is how integral retrieval works. It's calculating. You can imagine when I say area under the curve, you can imagine if you had a trend of the flow over time, integral is taking the integral of that curve and coming up with the area or the total amount underneath that curve. One really critical thing that needs to be configured for Historian is how the engineering unit associated with that attribute is configured. This is very much a unit of time based calculation. You can support rates that are measured, by second, by minute, by hour, by day. For example, if you have gallons per minute, or you might measure flow as gallons per second, or you might measure flow as gallons per hour. Historian needs to know what unit of time is being used. And this isn't something that you can fully configure through your application server attribute historization properties. This is something you would have to configure inside Historian itself, inside System Management Console. What you would do, of course, in your attribute configuration is assign a unit of measure to the attribute. This is important. So for integral retrieval to work, that attribute that you're historizing needs to have some sort of unit of measure associated with it. It's assumed it's going to be some sort of unit of time. And then once that's created inside of Historian, you need to go to the configuration for Historian, and you can see the screenshot on the left there of where to go, to the engineering units, find that engineering unit, and make sure that the time base of EU is configured correctly. So here we have a unit of measure that is feet per minute, and we need to make sure that the time base of EU is set to minute. Otherwise, your calculations will be off. The default for any new unit of measure that comes into Historian that it hasn't seen before, the default is that it's going to set this time base of EU to 1 second. So here's the risk. You create a attribute on an object like milliliters per hour, maybe, and you configure it to be historized. That tag gets created in Historian with a unit of measure of milliliters per hour, but Historian isn't smart enough to figure out that ml/h means milliliters per hour, so it defaults the time base of EU to 1 second, and you do an integral query and your numbers are way off because you're storing the data as milliliters per hour, but Historian thinks those numbers are per second, and you just get crazy, ridiculous results. The way to fix that is you edit that engineering unit in System Management Console, set the proper time base of EU. In that case, you would pick hour, and hit OK, commit your changes, and then the results will be correct. But that is critical that you have this configured correctly. So that's integral retrieval. Now, the last one, simple thing number 8, is round-trip retrieval. Round-trip retrieval is pretty interesting. What it does is it's kind of like time and state, but it only measures the length of time on a round trip. An easy way to describe this, if we look at this little chart down below, is if you're looking at some sort of a discrete bit, like maybe a pump being off or on, round trip retrieval will tell you the time between when it went on and the next time it was turned on. Or it'll tell you the time when it turned off and then the next time it turned off. So if the timing of things is very important to you, if you want to run a query on, say, cycle times, round trip retrieval is a good option. Again, this is supported by Historian Client. We have an example here. Again, I'll just edit the function and we'll just end up at the same old tab. Under the retrieval tab, retrieval mode is round trip. The other thing we can do is we can, besides setting optimistic quality over here, we tell it, just like value state retrieval, you tell it what kind of calculation you want. So do you want the average round trip time? Do you want the minimum round trip time, the maximum, the total, that kind of thing? So you pick the calculation you want, and then if you want, you can optionally specify the state. So here we're looking at whether or not a cycle is running, and I'm only looking at state 1, or in other words, yes, the cycle is running. What is the average round trip time for my cycles? And my average is actually pretty slow. That's in milliseconds, so we're looking at 65 seconds per cycle from the time that one cycle starts till the next cycle starts. Again, I have the most inefficient bottling machine ever. So anyway, that is round trip retrieval. It's pretty straightforward. Great for measuring cycle times or things like that. Or maybe like, it can also be helpful if you want to measure things like mean time to repair or mean time between failures and such, if you want to track that kind of data in your Historian as well. So that is it. Those are the 8 simple things. Here's a list of resources I'll let you take a gander at. Again, this was inspired by the Wonderware Historian Server Scenarios Guide, which comes with Historian. If you have Historian installed, you will find that PDF on your machine. It's also part of the Historian Books Online help. Again, I'll remind you that if you're interested in Historian Insight, that you can find that as part of Patch 1 for Historian 2014 R2 Service Pack 1. If you want to check out Historian Insight yourself but don't want to install it yet, you can find a demo on online.wonderware.com. Let's go there and just to show you that real quick. So Historian Insight for Wonderware Online is their Historian in a Cloud offering. Yes, Wonderware does have Historian in the cloud if you'd like that. And they use Insight, more or less the same website I showed you earlier, as their primary user interface into it. And you'll see it's very similar. So if you want to get a taste of how Historian Insight works without having to install it yourself at this point in time, just go to online.wonderware.com, click the Try It Now button, and it is very close to the same thing. They do a very good job of keeping the Wonderware Online Insight updated every few months or so. They introduce new features. Since it's cloud-based, they can deploy at will. So there might be some features here that aren't available with the on-site version of Historian Insight, but it's very, very, very close. I will point out one extra thing that the online version has that the on-premise version does not. Is this over here on the right, this news feed where it's pointing out data anomalies. For example, here it's pointing out that the temperature in Wellington is unusually low. That is a feature of the online version. The on-premise version does not have that. So you will see some differences, but for the most part, they're very similar. I encourage you to go check that out. online.wonderware.com. Try it now. The Creating and Managing our Kester Graphics Users Guide goes into the details on how to use the trend pen and how to use the custom properties for historical summary data. And then there are a couple of tech notes that talk about some things in detail as well as far as those custom properties. And there's a video on using the pen trend. So, thanks for viewing this video. Have a good day.